going to take the North and never give it back.
So that's a good pick. You get the corner. I got to go bold, right? I got to go bold for this.
Yeah, she's got some nice.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron. Make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube as we are so darn close to our quest to 5,000 subscribers. Also, make sure to rate 5 stars everywhere that you get your podcast. And last but not least, if you haven't already, download the draft guide, link down in the description. You can access it for free as a big thank you to all the support that I've been getting. And if you want to donate, you can buy me a coffee, buy me a drink in the description. That's out there inside of the free draft guide. But we're also almost to 100 different player profiles out there. So I'll update it once I reach the magic number of 100, and we'll just keep going until draft time. But today, we're breaking down the wide receivers. And this is really, we'll call this part 1, because we're going to break down my top 10, and we'll also talk a little bit about the people just outside of my top 10 for the wide receivers, and really just kind of break down what they would mean for the Chicago Bears, what position do they kind of play, and then also pros, cons, all that you come to know with this show. So that's enough talk. Let's actually, the one other thing that I'll talk about, this is a phenomenal group of wide receivers. And I know that it's been talked about, but really when you look at these, you look at the top, amazing wide receivers. Then you look in the middle rounds, you look in the later rounds. This class is loaded with wide receivers, and that's why we're going to have 2 separate videos for this, so I can do the top 10, and then we'll do like 10 later rounds, 3rd, 4th, 5th. There's a lot of good freaking wide receivers out there. So now let's get started. Let's go right into my wide receiver number 10, and this also has the Ryan Poles stamp of approval, which means played in the Senior Bowl and has a RAS score of over 8. And that's Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver out of Georgia, measured in at 6'1" and weight 189 pounds. A RAS score of 991. That is incredible. That is top of the line. 4.41 40-yard dash, 1.49 10-yard split, which was in the 99th percentile. Elite agility grade, elite explosion grade, and that's what you see on tape. This guy just has incredible body control. If you haven't already, do yourself a favor. Look up Ricky Pearsall highlight catches. He made one of the greatest catches you'll ever see. But this guy is a very, very physical slot weapon and reminds me a little bit of Khalil Shakir coming out of Boise State. Now he's a wide receiver for the Bills. And just overall, Ricky Pearsall, very sound, smooth route runner. Now, the only thing that I don't necessarily love is I don't see, out of all these crazy athletic scores and agility, I didn't really see that out on tape. And also, you don't see a lot of the breaking of tackles, where to me, that's kind of, I want to see the top layer of his game, where if he could break some more tackles, I feel like then he would start to kind of move up a little bit. And also, this really does feel like he's going to be more of a slot-only type of a player. Even though he is 6'1", he is a little bit lighter, and I think he does kind of get that slot role, even though I don't think he's going to be an exclusive slot route runner. I think he can play some outside. Really good. 65 receptions, 963 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Also, really, really exploded when he went out to the Senior Bowl and just kind of dominated out there, which is all those things. Check the boxes for Ricky Pearsall. That's why he's my number 10 wide receiver. He's the consensus wide receiver 11, number 48 on the consensus big board, and a 77.2 PFF grade last season. But overall, if the Bears can nab him in like the second round, I think right now it looks like he's going more in that second round type of a range. But if he can get down into that day 2, maybe he drops to that number 75 pick. He's been going up so many draft boards that I think he's going to be out of the range of 75, but could be someone that the Bears target if they end up getting a second round draft pick. But let's go over to wide receiver number 9. And Pearsall and this next wide receiver, I kind of flip back and forth. And I've mentioned this guy before, and we'll talk about some of the concerns that I have with him. But this guy, the way he looks as a wide receiver, I know some of you don't like him out there, but Jermaine Burton, the wide receiver out of Alabama, 6 foot, 196, 4.45 40-yard dash, elite explosion grade with a 38.5-inch vertical, over an 11-foot broad jump, which is just absolutely nuts. Jermaine Burton tested at a 9.09 RAS score. Very good. But what I could tell you about him is like I mentioned, 6 foot, 196, and projected to go in day 2. He is the consensus wide receiver 16, number 77 overall on the big board. He is my wide receiver 9. Reminds me a little bit of Kenny Stills. Also reminds me a little bit of the hype that I felt when I watched Michael Wilson last year, where when I saw Michael Wilson, this was the dude that was going to be good, but was being dropped because of injury concerns. Jermaine Burton has amazing tape. He has this great polish, as I kind of put as his main strength. He just plays like a polished route runner, 39 receptions, 198 yards, 0 drops. If the ball is coming to him, he's coming down with the ball. 56% catch rate. Incredible. Very, very good. Over a 90th percentile in both grades against single coverage and zone coverage. He gets open. All these things, checks the boxes, does everything right. But his temper, his attitude. Supposedly he hit a woman after a game, and it sounds like it was more so his fault. Didn't go to the Senior Bowl. There's all these questions about the guy's character and who he is, and that's the thing that gets me nervous about him. Because there's all these character concerns. There's rumors that he left Georgia, or he was basically made to leave. There's rumors about that, the whole situation with Georgia and why he had to move over to Alabama. But that's the thing that gets me nervous about Jermaine Burton, is more about the person than anything else about the actual player. I think as a player, this guy is easily second round. And that's what I'm really kind of grading him on, is the type of a player he is, which is a phenomenal player. And talking about his game more, some of the things that I don't necessarily love that would make him a no-brainer first-round wide receiver is I don't see that kind of top-end elite speed out of Jermaine Burton, and that's where you see some of the questions of him maybe kind of shifting more into a slot role rather than a true outside wide receiver. But I gotta say, he's fun to watch. You put on the tape and you go, this guy's supposed to go. He was originally like a 4th, 5th round wide receiver. You put on the tape, you go, man, this guy in the 3rd, he should be around the 3rd. Even though that he's climbing, I think he should be in the 3rd. But do I think the Bears are going to be interested in him? Real talk, I don't. And that's where part of me wants to make my board a little bit like the Bears. But at the same time, I want to just talk about players like a Burton, where you see him and you go, why aren't the Bears higher on him? I think that the Bears might be scared away overall with that. So let's go and carry on to my wide receiver number 8. And this is someone I think that Shane Waldron might really, really like, and that's Xavier Legette, who also has a Ryan Poles stamp of approval. And Xavier Legette's testing, very good. 9.9 RAS score, 6'1", 221, bench 24 reps. This dude is built. This guy is jacked. He is just enormous. And people also expected him to be taller. I think they listed him at 6'4" and 6'3" at South Carolina. Measures in only at 6'1", but runs a 4.39, has an elite explosion grade, over a 10 broad, a 40-inch vertical. Xavier Legette reminds me a little bit of a DK Metcalf, and also kind of reminds me too of another former Chicago Bear that was a South Carolina Gamecock, and that's Alshon Jeffrey. And overall, Xavier Legette is wide receiver 12 on the consensus big board, number 56 overall player. He's my wide receiver 8, and 82.5 PFF grade, which was good for 35th. And truly, the ball skills, that's why he reminds me of Alshon Jeffrey. similar to like a Jermaine Burton. Burton was more of a reliable receiver. Xavier Legette is more true of the contested catch Alshon-esque receiver. 71 receptions, 1,255 yards, 7 touchdowns, 2.7 drop rate, 98th percentile versus single coverage. He will beat you in single coverage is all you need to know. If the ball's in his around him, he'll get it. Ran over 22 miles per hour, and just knowing that he's 220 pounds just makes you feel just like, holy crap, this guy's good. But a couple things. Some of the concerns, right? We know he can catch. We know that the athleticism's there, but there's a couple concerns with him. First off, he's a redshirt senior or a COVID senior, so he's played 5 years. And obviously this year was phenomenal. 71 receptions, 1,250 yards. But the 4 previous years before that, he had a total of 42 receptions in all of those 4 years combined. This guy was a special teams player for South Carolina. So my question is, why do you have this good of an athlete that's just sitting on your bench and you're not starting him and you're not playing him? Now, we know this guy's a good special teams player because that's what he was doing for the 4 years prior. Now he gets a shot. Now he dominates. So why? Why is that? And that's, to me, a big concern. Also, doesn't run a true full route tree, runs a lot of hitches and goes, but that's where he does remind me a lot of DK Metcalf, where some of the questions with DK is limited route tree, big-bodied guy, has this crazy speed. Xavier Legette did not test in the agility drills, and maybe that's because you saw what that did to DK Metcalf. That's why he is my wide receiver 8. That's why I'm a little bit higher on him too. I also did factor in, I think that the Bears will really like this guy. I think because of the size, because he kind of gives you a different dimension, and he is more of that true outside wide receiver and can more so win at that catch point. So overall, I'm higher than the consensus on Xavier Legette. I like him, but there is that risk of that whole 1 year of production. But now, let's get into wide receiver 7. Let's keep this train moving. And wide receiver 7 and 6. I've gone back and forth on this. And Xavier Worthy, who has met with the Chicago Bears, wide receiver out of Texas, 5'11", 165. Junior, and really down at UT. Now, those that know me, I am a Texas Longhorn fan, was originally born in Texas, and grew up a Longhorns fan. Xavier Worthy is phenomenal. And 3 very, very good seasons inside of Texas, has always been a good player for them. And the big calling card is his speed. We all know that he broke the 40-yard dash, but he's not just a speedster wide receiver. To me, he's so much more. You see the way that he runs routes, and that's where I think the big difference, like people want to comp him to, let's say, a John Ross. But if you look at his routes, only 8% of his targets were actually go routes. He's not just this run the straight line, get open. He has a lot more routes inside of his arsenal, and he uses his speed more of a functional game speed. Like, you kind of hear that term. He's not just straight line speed. It really is more functional game speed, and that's why I really like him. And I felt like I was high on him, but he's consensus wide receiver 7. He's my wide receiver 7, the consensus 35th player. And he's projected to go more in the late first just because of that speedy 40-yard dash. And that's why I think a lot of people might want to try and take a gamble at him at the end of that first round, especially when you have the Chiefs right there and they want to see this speed. He's probably the closest thing that we've seen to Tyreek Hill just because of the pure speed. But if I am the Bears, I'm packing on some weight. This guy is skinny. For those that are watching, you can kind of see some of his arms. The arms are slim. He needs to eat some cheeseburgers. He needs to eat something to just kind of pack on the pounds. And if he's running a 4.25, I'm more than fine with that. A 4.27, by all means, he is just naturally fast. But yeah, last year, 75 receptions, 1,014 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, 6.3 drop rate. And also, too, I thought that I heard that he was playing through an injury as well, and that's where some of his drops were coming from too. He's just a phenomenal player, 87th percentile against single coverage and versus the zone, so he can also find those holes in the zone. He's not just a speedster. I think that it's just, you add some pounds, I really, really like that he could be a good player. Also, seems like he has a good relationship with Caleb Williams, was tweeting some pieces out over to Caleb, so maybe a potential Chicago Bears if they trade down. Now, this would happen if, like what we talked about with the potential, if the Bills really want to move up. And I've said this before, the 28th pick is a little bit too far back, but that is kind of prime if you want to kind of get an Xavier Worthy and look at a wide receiver like that. We also know that Shane Waldron, he likes to create some of these mismatches, and Xavier Worthy gives you that mismatch. Now, all this to say, the PFF grade was 68.9, which was 340th. Not great, but you'll see these Texas wide receivers really didn't grade well in the PFF system. So, who's my next one? Like I said, 6 and 7 go back and forth for me, and that's Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas, junior, 6'2", 205, so a lot larger. His strength is, to me, route running, and just his weakness is, this is a guy that hangs his head. It kind of reminds me a little bit of George Pickens a little bit, where kind of takes some plays off, but the dude can block. The dude is a phenomenal route runner. He's also admitted he doesn't run full speed on some of his routes, which you can see it. That's kind of a positive, because then he has this next gear, but also at the same time too, he doesn't run full speed because he's not really trying out there sometimes. And like I said, as a Texas fan, watching some of these games and even just watching some of the tape back, the effort is the big question, which to me brings up the whole Chicago Bears piece. Is that something that the Bears want out of a wide receiver? Which doesn't really strike me as very Bears-like. But if you look at his grading at the combine, he blew it up. 9.99 RAS score. Like we said, 6'2", 205, elite explosion grade with a 39.5-inch vertical, an over 11 foot broad jump, and also elite speed, 4.34 40-yard dash, and a 1.48 10-yard split. Just absolutely bonkers, especially for his size. He gives you everything that you want in a number one wide receiver. And last year, 55 receptions, 845 yards, 11 touchdowns, 1.8% drop rate, 98th percentile in single coverage, but 49th versus the zone. So kind of struggled when he was trying to find the holes in those zones, but ultimately, when you see this guy on tape, this looks like that 5-star athlete and just gives you that number one target. Reminds me a lot of T. Higgins, just because I think he's more of that T. Higgins type of player. I don't think he's going to be top of the line, but I think that he's good enough to be someone's number one and has kind of this large room to grow. And I think he's not I don't want to say a complete boom or bust, but I think because of his effort, you see the raw talent. And I know a lot of teams are going to be interested in that. He's projected to go in the late first. He's the number 28th overall prospect, wide receiver 5, and I have him wide receiver 6. And I think ultimately this is where, yet again, he's actually projected to go at that Bills spot at number 28. So if the Bears were to trade extra far back, that's where you'll see him. But I think that's ultimately where he ends up going, only if it's that huge trade back. So let's move on to wide receiver 5. Now, if you know the wide receiver class, you probably know who wide receiver 5 is for me. And if you didn't, wait a little bit longer and I'll describe why some of the other wide receivers did not make the top 10. My number 5 wide receiver is Lad Mcconkey, wide receiver out of Georgia, and also gets the Ryan Poles stamp of approval. This guy is a very good athlete. Elite speed, running a 4.39 and a 1.52 10-yard split. Elite agility grade. Just a good explosion grade, more so because of his 36-inch vertical leap. Size, a little poor, 5'11", 186. But this guy is going to be good at the next level. I think when you look at Lad Mcconkey, you see it, 30 receptions, 483 yards, and 2 touchdowns. It might get you concerned, but he was banged up last year for the Georgia Bulldogs. Also, Georgia, their wide receivers never seem to have crazy production anyways. But this is just a pure playmaker. 93rd percentile also in separation over the past 2 seasons. So this is a 2-year sample size, 93rd percentile. That's what you want to see. This guy just gets open. It's just as simple as that. He gets open, he catches the ball, and he can make big plays. They would throw it to him, and they would literally just throw it to him on like a screen, and he'll just make a big play happen. And that's where, to me, Mcconkey reminds me a lot of like an Eddie Royal. He's projected to go in the early second round. I don't see him as a true first-round wide receiver, but also Ladd really did show because of his speed numbers. He's not just a slot player. I think he best projects in the slot, but I think he can play outside, similar to like a Ricky Pearsall. I think he can play outside a good amount. Do I want him as my true outside X receiver? Probably not, but I think he can kind of split that 50-50. And that's where I think he could be a very good player for the Chicago Bears and someone that, yet again, more so in that second round. So if the Bears trade back to the 15th spot and pick up another second rounder, Mcconkey could be an option for them, but does have that great shiftiness. My only question, it is that size, right? You would like him to be a little bit bigger to have more that true X receiver type of mentality, but ultimately, Mcconkey to me is a very, very safe bet that you can get, and that's why he is my wide receiver 5, mixture of big playability, but also safeness. He's the consensus number 37 player and wide receiver 8, which I think is a little bit too low. And then also PFF gave him an 82.6 grade, which was 36. So now it's time for the consensus number 4 players at the wide receiver position that we're breaking down. This guy is, no matter what, I think this guy is everyone's number 4 wide receiver out there, and that's Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver out of LSU, junior, 6'3", 209. And let's just look at the numbers. 9.84 RAS score, 4.33 40 time at 209. That is crazy. And a 1.52 10-yard split, 38.5-inch vertical over a 10-foot broad. So he's got that athletic profile. To me, it's hard to find a good comp for him. And Martavis Bryant kind of comes up when he was with the Steelers, not when he was with the Bears, where he's just kind of this more of a deep ball wide receiver, very good profile to him. But I know a lot of people have Troy Franklin, which we'll talk about later, and him kind of as the same player. When I see Brian Thomas is head over heels better than the wide receiver out of Oregon. But also too, the questions that I have is more that short route tree. Now, when I was watching the players side by side at the combine, I would like to see a little bit more quickness and suddenness out of his routes. Now, on the actual game tape, you do see more of that, but still, I question just kind of that all-around wide receiver. He does have the athletic profile for it, but yet again, at LSU, asked to be more of that Z deep receiver. But still, 68 receptions, 1,177 yards, 17 touchdowns at LSU, 93rd percentile in separation over the past 2 years. So yet again, very, very good profile there. 82.6, which was the 36th highest grade among wide receivers from PFF. The number 19 consensus player, and like I said, everyone's wide receiver 4, my wide receiver 4. And just the pure raw speed that this guy has. If you want a downfield threat, that's where he can win day one. My biggest question is just that true all-around wide receiver game to him. But really, phenomenal player. Round 1 grade on him. But Brian Thomas Jr., just overall very good. So let's get into the top 3, shall we? And we talked about these wide receivers a lot, but I want to kind of revisit it again. So wide receiver number 3, Rome Odunze, 6'3", 212, ran a 4.45 40-yard dash, 1.54 10-yard split, and graded great in the explosion drills, great in the agility grade, and 9.92 RAS score. So he shows the athleticism when he was testing. And he's got that. And then he's got the dominant catch ball ability, 74.1% contested catch rate. Reminds me a lot of Mike Evans, as I've said before, the number 6 overall prospect, 87 receptions, 1,553 yards, 13 touchdowns. And really last year, he truly blossomed because the year before that, there are some questions about his true all-around wide receiver game. And this year, he had some nice routes that he was running, but also a lot of his contested catches were just phenomenal. And this is just someone that dominates at the point of attack, and that's why he does remind me a lot of a Mike Evans. He can play above the rim, so to speak, but there is some questions, right? We know all the goods, and I know that a million people will talk about the goods. I want to talk some of the stuff that does just have me a little bit concerned, why I'm hesitant. I've been hesitant to kind of officially label him as a blue chip player. He's in the 60th percentile for separation, which is not great for someone who's supposed to go top 10. And the 61st percentile in open target rate. So I question kind of that true getting openness. And this is where these top 3 wide receivers, it depends on what your quarterback wants. And I'm not here to say that Odunze sucks or anything like that, but it is important to kind of know how he wins. He is a contested catch guy. He's a possession player. As we saw with Justin Fields. Justin Fields struggled to kind of point out if someone was open. What will Caleb do for this? Does Caleb need the wide open receiver? Or if he has you need to have that good rapport with Rome for him to truly blossom. He might be covered, but the guy's going to make the play. The guy's going to make the catch. And that's just something to just understand with Rome Odunze's game. But yet again, a true outside number 1 receiver that you can draft. And also another kind of question, I didn't see a lot of great creation after the catch. After he's brought down, it was almost comedic because he got this giant guy, super fast. Cornerback just kind of brings him down. So just wanted to bring up a couple of those questions. Yet again, more of the contested guy than anything else. But let's go to the top 2. These are my 2, for sure, hands down, blue chip players. Malik Nabers, wide receiver out of LSU. We have the grades on it. We have the testing numbers from him now. Scored a 9.67 from the RAS score. A lot of receivers did not want to do the agility drills as I'm going through some of this. Speed was great. Ran a 4.38 40-yard dash. 6 foot, 199. So he's not huge. Just kind of that smaller type of a build, but to me kind of fits more that Garrett Wilson modern type of wide receiver. A 42-inch vertical and an over 10 broad, so an elite explosion grade. And that's exactly what you see on tape. Malik Nabers is just incredible and reminds me a little bit of Antonio Brown, but also kind of, to me, has some shades of like a Jamar Chase, where Jamar Chase, when you just put on his tape, he just creates this crazy amount of separation. He just always seems to be open. And to me, Malik Nabers, it is that acceleration that he puts on tape. Last year, 86 receptions, 1,546 yards, and 14 touchdowns. The consensus number 5 player. And I do think that when you look at the wide receivers, there is a big gap between Nabers and Rome Odunze, just because I think Nabers is such a quick, fast receiver. And that's why I hope that he drops. That's why I hope that there's like the stuff coming out that he's a high maintenance wide receiver. He's also, fun fact, he's also a Call of Duty partner with Caleb Williams. That's right. They play COD together. They're friends. Like I've said before, when you look at them at the scouting combine, they were always hanging out together. These guys are buddies, and man, I'd be fine with this. I'd be fine with the Malik Nabers for sure. And yet again, there's different types of receivers. Nabers with that smaller stature might be more of that slot receiver, still can win on the outside, but a lot of these players that we've talked about kind of can shift more inside, so more of that slot. But also, fun fact, 43 of his 86 catches went for more than 15 yards, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, some of the downsides, like I mentioned, the size, but also kind of 1 year of true elite tape, I would say. 2022 was still very good. I dare say great. It was some great tape, but yet again, one true elite season that just looked absolutely dominant. So if you want to look at some weaknesses, there's that. But really, Malik Nabers, phenomenal prospect that would usually be the wide receiver one in majority of classes. But that brings me to the true number one wide receiver. That's Marvin Harrison Jr. What else can we say about this guy? Last year, 67 receptions, 1,211 yards, 14 touchdowns, won the best wide receiver of the year, even though his quarterback was not playing well. 6'4", 205. He's got the size. He's got the speed. This year, too, a lot of people question his big playability and creating after the catch, and he showed that. He really did show that on tape. He's one of my favorite players to watch. He plays like a 67-year-old veteran wide receiver that just decided to come back into the NCAA. He just sets them up perfectly. He uses his hands to create separation, but not in the sense of just like an absolute push. He just does these subtle veteran moves where he just kind of like lobs his hand in, and you only see that at the elite wide receivers at the NFL level. And to see someone doing that in college, it's just remarkable. 99.9 receiving grade versus single coverage. 99.9, guys. Anyone on him just was not able to cover him in the NCAA. And just an absolute crazy prospect, the number 3 overall prospect. He goes from number 3 to number 2, kind of flips back and forth. He had the 8th highest PFF grade last season among wide receivers at 89.9. And just true. This guy's phenomenal. And the Bears also brought him in. And I hope he rubs some teams the wrong way. I hope people say, this guy's arrogant. This guy is just, we don't want him in the locker room, because I hope that the Bears can get him. Now, would I want to trade what people are talking about, a potential next first round pick, next year's first? Probably not, to kind of move up. To me, if you could maybe get up just one of your extra seconds to move up and draft him, I'd be fine with that. But Marvin Harrison Jr., the obvious number 1 selection overall. And this is a look at my wide receiver draft board for those that are curious. And also for those listening, you can just click the link down below in the description and kind of see the full draft board that I have out there. But as you can see, a lot of good talent. So the last little bit that I want to talk about are the players that a lot of other people have in the top 10 that I just don't have, because I want to describe it, and it doesn't mean that they're bad by any stretch. Like I said, this wide receiver group is crazy good, and I want to kind of defend why they weren't in my top 10, because yet again, these players are very, very good. But let's start with my number 11 prospect, and that's Troy Franklin out of Oregon. And my wide receiver 11, he's the consensus wide receiver 8. And to be honest, I'm pretty low on Troy Franklin, and I might even bring him down a little bit lower. And part of that, he's 6'2", 176. He's very light. He's more of that just true deep ball player. And what I put him on, like I said, a lot of people had Troy Franklin and Brian Thomas in the same discussion because they're both the deep ball players. Brian Thomas looks like a wide receiver. He looks like you could teach him the other roles as a wide receiver. Troy Franklin, to me, it seemed like he was afraid to get hit when the ball was in the air. Like, he just seemed to always be away from contact, and I just didn't really like that. A 10% drop rate too. So he was good. He was good in Oregon, but that's why I kind of am lower on him. I just didn't like that he doesn't play with this physicality that I like to see out of my wide receivers. And that's why, to me, I'm a little bit lower on Troy Franklin. Also, too, I got to give him some credit. 95th percentile in yards route run. And you look at it, 1,383 receiving yards last year. So pretty phenomenal. But that's what he does. He's a deep ball wide receiver. And that's ultimately, like, I just didn't like that he just purely seemed like a deep ball player. And I didn't see the elite speed that you want to see out of a true raw deep threat. That's why Valdez-Scantling is kind of the easy comp for him, but it didn't necessarily fall in love with his tape. But the next player, wide receiver 12, And this to me is one of the most fascinating players. We talk about boomer bust. This guy's a boomer bust for me, just period. And that's Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State. My wide receiver 12, he's the consensus wide receiver 9, 6'3", 213 junior. And this guy, this is why, to me, I was lower on him, but I didn't want to be too low on this guy. This guy could be the best, like maybe not the best, but someone that we're talking about as an all-pro wide receiver. And I mean that with all sincerity, because this guy reminds me of some of his catches like prime Odell Beckham, where he just snatches it out of the air, and it's just unreal. You don't know how he makes these grabs, but he just freaking does it. But this is someone who does not get open. 47th percentile in separation, 53rd in open target rate. It's not just the stats that say it, it's the eye test. This guy's always covered. That's why he kind of reminds me of a Hakeem Butler, but like next level Hakeem Butler, where he can just make any snatch. And then also, the thing that is even more confusing about this player, like I said, he doesn't create separation. And then also, he tested kind of poorly. But then when you see the numbers, like all the GPS tracking, this guy is one of the best wide receivers with the GPS numbers. And I think he was like literally the number one. I was looking at some numbers the other day, and someone who does kind of more of those GPS numbers where they actually track the player, like the actual play speed. Keon Coleman was one of the top receivers. So you test poorly. On field, you can run fast. You show this. He had the fastest speed out of anyone in the gauntlet. Keon Coleman is one of the biggest question marks. He could go in the second round. I still think he does. But Keon Coleman is just giant. Just mark him with the question. Boomer bust player. Just fascinating. So I'm curious. Do you guys think that Keon Coleman is going to be boom, bust? What's the thought? That's why, to me, I'm a little bit lower on him, because historically we see if you can't create separation, that translates to the next level. Because if you can't beat your guy in college, you can't beat your guy in the NFL. And my last person that I want to bring up, he was just outside of the top 10 on the consensus, wide receiver 11. I have him wide receiver 14. He has the Ryan Poles stamp on him. That's Roman Wilson, Michigan receiver, 5'11", 185. And I'll tell you the reason why he's kind of low on my grading list. There's a lot of slot receivers that we were talking about. Roman Wilson, to me, just doesn't necessarily pop like the others do when it comes to just the pure speed, the pure route running even as well. And yeah, when you're smaller and you don't have this large catch radius, and also has only broken 2 tackles last year, so didn't really create much after the catch, I just didn't really fall in love with him. Now, he did perform well at the Senior Bowl. That's when a lot of people started going, okay, so Roman Wilson, you can play receiver. You're pretty darn good. But to me, he's just a solid player. Like, I don't hate him by any means, but I just see him, and I just think that it's a very low ceiling, very high floor type of player that I just didn't necessarily fall in love with. But like I said, let me know what you think down below. And next time we break down these wide receivers, I already see some that I can't wait to talk about. I could probably pull together another extra 10 wide receivers. I'll see how many sleepers I can put together. But if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube so you don't miss the next wide receiver episode. We got more players to break down. We got more draft profiles for me to create and throw out to you. I hope you enjoy all this. And with that, Unbearable Sports Podcast, we are out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a